Miami season is over, but news about the team's future is still happening. Can Miami afford to give Jimmy Butler a new contract extension? Should Tyler Hero return to his six-man role? And is this version of the Heat finished as we know it? We keep you updated on your favorite team with a great new episode of Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your daily podcast on the Miami Heat. I'm Wes Goldberg, editor at allyoucanheat.com. Joining me as always, credentialed Heat media member David Ramil. However you're tuning in on YouTube, Odyssey, or your favorite podcast app, thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. We got to talk more about Monopoly Go, the fast-paced game that lets you team up with friends and tournaments to unlock awesome prizes like unique stickers for trading, cool playing pieces, and hilarious emojis for taunting your friends. Download Monopoly Go now for free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. Udonis Haslem went on television and might have laid out the Heat's offseason plan in its entirety. But before we get to that, the Jimmy Butler noise, David, starting to grow to a national level and starting to reflect a lot of the things that you and I have talked about on this show, a lot of things that you and I have talked about privately over the last few months too. And this could be a pivot point for the Heat and for Jimmy Butler this offseason. We've heard speculation now over the last couple of days from Brian Windhorst, Zach Lowe, Howard Beck, all the national voices that people go to for these kinds of things. And all of them saying that the Heat could trade Jimmy Butler this summer, depending on what happens with his contract extension. So for people who have been listening to this show, the fact that this summer could get sticky for the Heat and Butler isn't new, but what do you make of the national media starting to talk about this now that the Heat season is over?
Well, I think it's because the Heat season is over and the fact that they had to play the playoffs without Jimmy Butler. And so you're looking at, Miami's biggest name, star player, and Jimmy Butler, and the fact that he is entering a contract negotiation period, and you have to start wondering about his future in Miami. So that makes sense. Like nobody brought up that noise last year after they made a run to the finals. It was all about Tyler Hero, if you can afford to jettison him because he didn't play. But now the kind of tables have turned a little bit. Jimmy's not available. He's getting older. There's a contract issue coming up. And these questions are legitimate. And you just have to start wondering. So I think part of that is just kind of generating content, making noise, and kind of stirring things up. But I think, as you indicated, that there is some legitimacy there. There is some concern about what Jimmy can do and what he can provide moving forward, and whether Miami has to make a decision regarding whether or not they're willing to pay him that kind of money. So I think one of it is part of it is just noise, as we're going to see at the end of the season after Miami was drubbed out of the playoffs by the Celtics. But there's also something there that is a concerning pivot point, as you said, for the Miami Heat front office and for Jimmy Butler, whether or not he can get that kind of money, if in fact that's exactly what he wants. And so we're seeing reports locally, nationally, that he wants that contract extension. I have no reason to doubt that that's the case, but Miami has to make a tough decision from a front office perspective, whether or not they want to tie their future and $60 million in a couple of years to Jimmy Butler at age 38.
Yeah, we'll get into the contract particulars on the next segment. We'll kind of dive into what those numbers could look like and why they may or may not make sense for Miami and what Jimmy Butler specifically is looking for from the Heat. But you mentioned it as noise, and I don't know. I would push back a little bit on the noise part of it. I do think that this is just sort of what happens in the life cycle of the NBA season, and the media coverage with it is, hey, the team's not playing basketball anymore, so we can't talk about their basketball games anymore. What's next, right? And we're seeing this now with a lot of other teams too. Like once the Clippers fall out, it's going to be what happens with Paul George and James Harden in their extensions. It's going to be like, this is just sort of the natural thing we go to. And like I said, like this is something that you and I have been talking. I remember times where you and I talking courtside before Heat games, not on this podcast, about like, what are the Heat really going to do with Jimmy Butler? Because it has been brewing, and this is something that people have been talking about now in the national media. And you're right, like it is sort of like now you tell us, now that the Heat are out of it. But like I said, that's just the way it goes. This has been brewing now since basically December, January is when you and I started first hearing stuff of don't be so sure about Jimmy Butler and his future, because this extension, it could get a little tricky here, right? And as you and I know, and people in this market know, it doesn't matter how loyal any sides are are with each other. Money reveals everything. Contract negotiations reveal a lot of truths and maybe a lot of fissures in any sort of relationship. People saw this with the Heat and Dwayne Wade. Next thing you know, you wake up, Dwayne Wade signing with the Chicago Bulls, and you're like, how did this happen? right?
Right.
So if Dwayne Wade can leave, Jimmy Butler certainly can leave. And so over a contract negotiation. He's going to be 35 going into next year. He did not have a good season. This was, I think, Jimmy Butler's worst season in a Heat uniform. And even some of his numbers are down for sure, but how many times have we watched these games and his impact has always sort of transcended the box score, but watching these games, I never felt like I saw that transcendent over the box score impact very often. And when I did, it was a lot further in between. It just seemed like every week and a half he would kind of summon that kind of Jimmy Butler, and it wasn't happening enough. And you could just start to see the decline in his age. And by the way, the stats also do reflect that. Worst shooting percentage at the rim, all these things, like typical indicators that suggest a player aging. And by the way, he's not LeBron James. Very few players are who could play at that level when they're 39, 40 years old, right? LeBron is the exception, not the rule. Jimmy Butler starting to show age at 34 years old, going on 35, makes sense. It would be weird if it wasn't happening. So, and so obviously, I think everybody has to think about what does the future look like. And I don't know that it takes a whole lot of sourced reporting, in other words, David, to figure out that this could get tricky.
Yeah.
But there is also a lot of scuttle within the sourced reporting world around in NBA circles that this could get tricky. And we're already hearing things that like, hey, Philadelphia, they've got max cap space. If the Heat aren't willing to pay Jimmy Butler, they might. Like we just heard Brian Windhorst say this, that the Sixers have max cap space. If they can't get somebody like Paul George to leave their current team and sign into their space, they could look to just absorb a player's salary into that space, right? And then the Heat would be able to get draft picks or whatever else came back, but it also free up themselves from having to deal with the Jimmy Butler contract negotiation. But obviously that would close the door on whatever this era is. And that's sort of what we're also talking about here. Beyond just the contract extension, like, are we really looking, like, is this how the Jimmy Butler era ends with him with an MCL sprain? Just barking from the sidelines and talking to Chris Haynes about they wish I wasn't out there? Is that really how this is going to end?
It's possible. I mean, I think we're recording this early Monday morning, hours before Pat Riley's end of season press conference. And I'm looking at that conversation with Pat, and he's well known for saying a lot and not really divulging a lot at the same time. He's very masterful at exactly how much he says and how much he puts out there, but there are always little nuggets of truth. When it comes to Jimmy and the contract negotiations, if Pat doesn't offer a definitive, the contract is going to be resolved, we're going to take care of Jimmy, et cetera, something that's a huge vote of confidence, then I certainly think it opens up the possibility even further that Jimmy's future in Miami should be in doubt. And I think that's the way to think about this is that, they're going to be, if he can't say outright, we're going to lock him up, he's part of our future, like he said it in the past, like when he's talked about Bam in the past, Bam, a younger player under contract, maybe whatever, he has always given that kind of vote of confidence that he's a centerpiece, the building block of the future, that kind of rhetoric regarding a younger player. When it comes to Jimmy and his future, and given exactly what we've seen, I'm curious to see whether or not he offers a realistic analysis of what we saw this past season and a realistic forecasting of what he might be willing to do regarding his contract negotiation in the future. So,
and
as far as the overall,
one point on Bam, I'm glad you brought him up. He's also eligible for an extension. A 3-year, $165 million extension is what Bam's going to be eligible for. I'm going to assume that that's going to be put on Bam's table and said, do you want this? Because if you want it, you can have it. Or, you can wait and there's another kind of version of extension that he doesn't have to sign it this year. This is sort of the first year where he's eligible. He could still do it next summer. But the Heat, they're going to just say, if you want it, it's yours. They are going to do that to Bam. And so it's not just because a player is extension eligible that these questions start to come up, right? We're not hearing those questions about Bam because we know that they're going to extend that offer to him, and it's going to be Bam's option to pick it up or not, or kick the can down the road for another summer. With Jimmy, that is not the case at all. We don't know where that number figure is going to come in. We don't know if the Heat are going to come in with something that might upset Jimmy Butler, that could offend him, right? Because Jimmy can go.
What happened with Dwayne?
It's exactly what happened with Dwayne, right? Exactly, and so. Jimmy Butler has a point when he's going to go into these negotiations. Him and Bernie Lee are going to be like, we saved this team. You were dealing with Dion Waiters and James Johnson, and now, and we came in here in 2019, and propelled basically what was the second greatest era of Miami Heat basketball in the franchise's history. You're not going to pay me like a star? I'm a star. I'm on billboards all over this freaking city. I was at F1. Like, I'm a star, man. And so, and then the Heat are going to be like, well, you're going to be 35 next year, and you miss 25 games a season. And the only reason we ever wanted to pay you this money is because Playoff Jimmy was able to pull us through these playoff races, but then you were not able to be that player because you were injured for this last postseason. So no, we don't want to pay you that. And both sides will have a point. I don't know that any team knows where this is going to go. I don't know that the Heat know what they're going to do. I don't know that Jimmy Butler and Bernie Lee and his whole camp, I don't think that they know how this is going to unfold. All I know is that nothing is guaranteed one way or the other. We'll dive into some of the particulars about these numbers, plus get to Udonis Haslem's quotes about what he thinks the Heat will do this offseason next year on Locked On Heat.
Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. All right, game off. We got to pause here and talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying. Flag on the play. You already talked about it. But you know what? There's just so much good stuff in the game. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for time tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. And the more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. And there's so much to get, from unique stickers that you can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes. You can get cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with. You can get hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique mini games like digging for treasure or a robot pachinko machine. And there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. It's a classic game now available when you download it for free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. Today's episode also brought to you by FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL. Go Cats. And FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and so much more. Go visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We'll be right back.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube and on your favorite podcast app. Everydayers, tune in later today. David and I will be recording from Kaseya Center after Pat Riley's press conference, so we'll have that out for you. Pat Riley's press conference, 1 p.m. Eastern is supposed to start. Usually goes for about an hour. Takes us probably about an hour to get it uploaded after that. So maybe your drive time after you listen to this one.
So excited to hear what he has to say.
Very much excited. And we know that he's going to be talking about Jimmy Butler's contract, and I think he's going to be getting a lot of questions about Jimmy Butler's contract. To get into the particulars of what we're really dealing with here. So Jimmy he's not a free agent, and I want to make that distinction. He's still under contract for about $49 million next year, and for $52.4 million the year after that, he's got a player option for the 2025-26 season. So he is still currently, he has a contract for the next 2 seasons, right? That's
right.
But if he decides that he wants that contract extension, and all indications, the Miami Herald reporting over the weekend that Jimmy's going to go into Pat Riley's office and ask for the full 2-year max extension, okay, which would basically tack on another year, essentially. So it would drop the player option and then add 2 more lucrative years after next year's $49 million salary. So no matter what happens, Jimmy Butler under contract next year going to be making $49 million.
Correct.
So the way it lays out is current contract, I already said, $49 million this year, $52.4 the next year. If they take that out and add the extension, it would be $49 million next year, $54.3 million the year after that, so about a $2 million raise. And then the year after that, $58.6 million. And that'll be when Jimmy Butler is 37 years old. It would take Jimmy Butler from being outside the top 10 in players paid in the NBA to the 8th highest paid player in the league. Only Giannis, Damian Lillard, Anthony Davis, Nikola Jokic, and Joel Embiid would be making more money when Jimmy Butler is 37 years old. As you know, with current contracts being the way they are, there'll be other ones that get paid. But that's a lot of money. And everybody appreciates what Jimmy Butler has meant to the franchise and all these things. But I'm just going to say it. The Heat cannot pay him that. And Jimmy Butler, as the Herald has reported and as you and I have expected, is going to ask for it. So something's got to give, in other words, David.
I agree. I don't think there's any way you can go in there. And I know that we're going to get some brushback from fans and everything else like that. Although I think there's a louder voice.
Yes, a
kind
growing
of,
contingent of people saying that even Heat fans. Well, I never thought we would get to this point, David. I really never
yeah.
did.
No,
But
I never thought
and it
I
has,
would get to this point. But
yeah,
I think this past season and his performance and what we're seeing as visible signs of decline have to give you pause as a front office. You cannot afford to do this. And then the more I think about it, the rationale is, well, Jimmy has been so fantastic, and I don't think there's any denying that. He's been great over the last 5 seasons. This last one, as you pointed out earlier, the worst one in a Heat uniform, but he's still been great. He's still the vocal leader. He's still the inspirational leader in that locker room. Whatever grumbling you might hear about his performance or his off the court stuff or everything else like that, there's no denying how much value he has provided for this team over the last 5 years. But the only 2 teams in NBA history that have rewarded a player for their past actions are the Los Angeles Lakers with Kobe Bryant and the Dallas Mavericks with Dirk Nowitzki. And that set both those teams into lottery-bound cap hell for a number of years where neither sniffed the playoffs for a long goddamn time. And Miami is not that front office. Miami will not give this contract extension to Jimmy Butler if it's just for past actions. If they do give it to him, it's because they have a genuine belief that he's going to continue playing at a high level, or because there are incentives written into that contract extension, which will guarantee that money only if he's eligible because he plays a certain number of games or takes them to a certain level in the NBA playoffs. Otherwise, they cannot reward him because it just has not ever been done in NBA history, and it won't be done by this front office.
the incentives thing is interesting. We saw this recently with Zion and the Pelicans, right? How there was stipulations in that contract, games played, things like that, and apparently other things in terms of like his own body testing and things like that.
Yes.
You can add those things into an NBA contract. There's no rules against it. The problem is sort of like before. You risk offending Jimmy Butler. He's like, excuse me, I'm Jimmy Butler. You're going to demand that I play 65, 70 games in a year? No way. Like, I'm Jimmy Butler. You don't get to do that. And he has, like I said, he has a point. He should have that ego. He absolutely should. But he's not going to get the max contract. He's not from Miami. I'd be very, very surprised. And this isn't just a matter of hey, like, we just don't want to pay this guy. Like, in today's salary cap, you can really only afford to pay 2 guys max level, like $50+ million a year. We've already established that Bam's getting that money. So then the question is, who's the second guy getting that money? Because if you have like 3 guys, you kind of end up with what the Clippers are dealing with, or even worse, like the Phoenix Suns, where it's really hard to build the roster around it with the second tax apron. And the Heat right now are basically bumping up against the second tax, or they might even be past it. I'm not really sure. It depends on kind of where you look. But they're essentially operating as a first luxury tax team, which already comes with its own penalties, and darn close to becoming a second tax team, with most people projecting them turning into that for a team that's been in the play-in tournament 2 years in a row. That's just not worth it, right? You need to get something more. And as great as Jimmy Butler has been in the playoffs, it's also a reality that he's not the easiest guy to work with. And we know this, right? It's been reported out there. Jimmy Butler, he kind of wears on teammates over the course of a 5 months regular season. He can kind of wear on coaches. Heck, we saw Jimmy Butler and Eric Spoelstra almost come to blows on the sideline a couple years ago. Like, these are real things that happen. And if he's not also providing you with a baseline in the regular season that helps you avoid the play-in tournament and just makes things easier on the organization, then there is just going. I'm not saying that the Heat are at this point now, but there can be a point where the benefits don't outweigh the negatives anymore. And as Jimmy Butler ages, that could become a reality. And so these are just all things that the front office has to think about.
No doubt. I mean, we heard from Eric Spoelstra, like, legitimate, not concern, but consternation regarding the fact that they were a playing team, that they do care about the regular season. Like, he mentioned this in his own exit interview after the season ended. Like, they don't want to be that kind of team. They want things to be a little bit easier, so you don't have to fight uphill every time just to be able to generate a spot in the playoffs in the first place. So, they definitely put themselves at a disadvantage this season. And I think Jimmy and his injuries was a big part of it. Maybe the fact that he's just not able to carry the team or produce to the same degree during the regular season, whether it's by choice, whether it's because of his body breaking down, whatever. The reality is that that's where they are. Jimmy did not carry this team the way he was expected to, the way he is paid to. And while you could certainly say, well, the hope is that he'll be able to do it during the playoffs, He didn't get that chance. And like I said, I just don't think that they can go back and say, well, you know what? You've been such a great part of this team for 5 years. Of course, we're going to give you that money. Like, that's just not how teams operate. And I don't think they should necessarily. They just don't have.
It's such a good point that you made earlier about the Lakers and the Mavericks. I mean, we've seen this happen in history, and it doesn't work out. And the whole idea that you pay your stars so that you're attracted to other stars has also been proven not to be a thing. I think other stars, NBA players,
they played hardball with Michael Jordan in Chicago. Right. They were like, sorry, you're getting older. We're kind of done with this whole version of The Last Dance. You know, we've seen this. Like, if you can get rid of Michael Jordan and kind of force his way, or at least nudge him towards retirement, because we're not going to pay Phil, or we're not going to pay Scotty, we're not going to pay all the other role players, then you can do it with Jimmy Butler. I mean, again, what happened with Dirk and Mark Cuban was
they didn't pay Dwayne Wade, and then Dwayne Wade convinced Jimmy Butler to go to Miami.
Yeah,
despite
everything. Yeah,
despite everything. Players will take the money if they are in their prime and they believe they have a chance to win. Players are too smart; their agents are too smart to figure out, like, oh, they didn't pay Kobe 20 years ago, so now I'm gonna turn my nose up at the Lakers. No, the Lakers are the Lakers. They will always be in line for free agents. The Knicks will always be in line. The Heat will always be in line. These are the teams that are always, and that's sort of the benefit, right? Is we're the Miami Heat. If we don't pay you, tough luck. We're going to go get another star. Somebody else will take the money, because we're still the Miami Heat at the end of the day, and we're going to give you an opportunity to win. And right now, I think that we do need to ask, and the Heat are going to ask themselves, how do we stop doing what we're doing? It's been a crazy run, but we also understand that we didn't win a championship. And no team that has ever finished in the bottom 4 seeds in the playoffs has ever won a title. We need to be back into home court advantage in the playoffs. We need to make things easier for ourselves so we don't end up on the brink of elimination 2 years in a row in the play-in tournament. That's not a strategy of success. And then just hoping that your best player becomes some sort of Super Saiyan version of himself in the playoffs until he can't anymore. Because it's a matter of when, not if. And we might have already seen that moment pass for Jimmy Butler, but we'll see what happens. Like I said, I don't think anything is guaranteed. I think we need to come into the negotiations, both sides sort of staking their claim as to what they want to do. Jimmy Butler, I want all the money. Miami Heat kind of getting it out there. We're not going to get you all that money. Is there a middle ground? I think there has to be. There's always a middle ground. We'll see if they can reach it, or maybe it's just maybe it doesn't work. Maybe it might be okay if this era of Miami Heat basketball is over. But we have an entire offseason to carve into that. Pat Riley's
a lot to get into.
A lot to get into.
I'm trying to wrap my mind. Like, the idea also is, some people will say, well, you know, Jimmy's going to do what he did in the years past. It's like, well, Jimmy's also 5 years older. Like, you can't, you know, this isn't 7 years ago when he led the B and C team in Minnesota and kind of showed Tom Thibodeau, you know, that he deserved to get paid, and that's why they traded him to Philadelphia. It's been a long time since then. Like if he's going to make things uncomfortable here in Miami, it's like, well, good luck. I don't know how we're not going to pay you just because you're making things uncomfortable. We've dealt with discomfort before as a front office. You know, I just don't think that they can afford to cave on this either.
This is how things end with the Heat, right? Like, it didn't exactly end great with Shaq. It didn't end great the first time with Dwayne Wade. It wasn't awesome when LeBron left. It's not like everybody just shakes hands and like, well, that was a hell of a ride, and then smiling as their way out the door. Like, that's not how. And that's not just unique to the Heat, by the way. That's not typically how these things end in sports, not just in the NBA, in sports.
Right.
Very rare does it. Tom Brady with the Patriots, I mean, it doesn't end with just like a kiss on the cheek and a send-off. Like, that's not how this works, you know?
Good luck.
So we'll see what happens. Meanwhile, did Udonis Haslem go on TV and just outline the entire Heat offseason plan? We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Heat.
Today's episode is brought to you by DoorDash. This Mother's Day, you want to take care of your moms. Everybody loves their moms. Get something thoughtful for mom via DoorDash. You can surprise her from wherever you are with fresh bouquets, the latest tech, even a gift card from her favorite store, self-care treats, maybe a Theragun or something along those lines, so she can always stay in top shape, and more to make her day that much better. Because, you know, does your mom have a sweet tooth, excuse me? I know my mom certainly does. Is she a tech enthusiast? Does she like beauty products? Whatever it is that she loves, you can get her those things via DoorDash. Get all your Mother's Day gifts all in one place. When you're get 50% off your next order, up to $15 when you spend $15 or more on your next flour, convenience, grocery, or retail order now, but only if you use the code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA. Order using DoorDash today. Terms do apply. We'll be right back.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube and on your favorite podcast app. Still going strong 5 days a week here with all of your offseason content. We're going to get to exit interviews. You and I are starting our NBA draft prep. Not quite ready to get into our blue notebooks, but starting to get into that. We'll have our free agency big boards, our trade target big boards. I think I'm going to hang a big board. I think I'm going to have one here in my little home studio / corner of my apartment.
You can, because you're not a NBA GM, and you don't have to take a picture or a selfie with that said whiteboard behind you like the Orlando Magic and so many other teams have done in the past.
Happened. That's the funniest
names thing. We like, names we don't like, having nice and bold letters there.
I'm gonna have names I like, names I don't like in the back of my here. I think I'm gonna try to do that. This is gonna be a crazy offseason. I do believe that this could be. I don't know. I'm expecting fireworks across the league. I think there'll be potential big things happening with the Heat, or who knows. I know you and I differ on that, but we have a whole offseason to get into all that stuff. Again, as a reminder, we will be back later today with our post-Pat Riley press conference episode, digging into everything that Riley says in that. And so obviously we will have a few more details on what Miami's approach is to the offseason. But we might not need that, David, because Udonis Haslem went on First Take on Friday, basically gave up all the company secrets, it feels like. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but still, not that much. I don't know. You guys listen to it for yourselves.
It was a very tough loss for your Heat. Where do you think that this team goes from here?
To the hospital first, get healthy. That way we got to go first to get healthy. But obviously we got to get in the lab. You know what I'm saying? If I know anything about Riles, his job is to put this team in the best position possible to win a championship. And I think we all understand that we don't have that right now.
What do y'all need? I know you need health. I get that part.
Yes.
But from a basketball perspective, in terms of need, whether it be position, personnel, whatever, because certainly there's no need with coaching. The coach is set.
Yes.
What do you think y'all need?
Probably go out and get another scorer. Definitely need another scorer. If T-Rowe was healthy, then we could see him filling that role. But with T-Rowe being out and not being healthy, we don't really know. Yeah, Terry Rozier. If T-Rowe healthy, then he fill that role. Then he gets that scoring. But without T-Rowe, we didn't really have that. So I think we need another scorer and maybe another veteran guy, a big fella that can go down there and help Bam. I think Bam can play 4. He can move around a little bit. So if we get a center, maybe in the draft or through free agency, then we can move Bam to the 4. He's a switchable matchup, can guard all 5 positions, but he will have even more of a matchup at the 4 position where we can post him up more and do different things with him. So I think we go for a center and possibly another scoring guard. But I think Tyler's role for us and the best role for him is to probably be a 6-man. That takes nothing away from what Tyler does as a basketball player. But for our chemistry, we're better when we got Duncan Robinson in the starting lineup, making plays, being that trigger for us and spraying and creating for other guys. Tyler can come off in that second group. He doesn't have to worry about getting guys involved. He can just play basketball, score, and be who he is.
So Udonis Haslem saying the quiet part out loud there. Udonis Haslem saying the thing that I think Heat fans and you and I and people have speculated about for a long time. A couple of things, right? That, hey, is Bam better at the 4 than he is at the 5? Do the Heat need that optionality? Is Tyler Hero better suited coming off the bench as a 6th man? Is this starting lineup better with Duncan Robinson in Tyler Hero's place? This has been a topic of debate on this show and several other and among the fan base for a few years now. And it is interesting to me that Udonis Haslem goes on TV and says these things, because Udonis Haslem doesn't necessarily speak for the organization, but he is part of the organization. And I don't know that he's making decisions, but he has a lot of conversations with a lot of people at an organization. And it would not surprise me if there were people in that organization, in that front office, among the coaching staff that felt that way, right? And so we could get into the Bam part.
He practices with a team. Yeah.
Right. So
he plays with the team, practices with the team. Like, if anybody's going to know or be as plugged in, this isn't just like somebody from on high making executive decisions. This is somebody who kind of sees it on the court and has lived it, because he's played with this team specifically last year and knows exactly what it entails. And he's offering his opinion. And I think you're right. I think it's probably reflective of other conversations from other executives in the front office. So it just makes a lot of sense, and everything that he said. Again, it's not like this is like some weird reach or anything like that. If there's any part of his conversation or what he explained on First Take that I think is a bit of a reach was, the idea that they need a scoring guard. I think they had a scoring guard in Terry Rozier maybe, and he kind of alludes to that, but that would be the first way the first thing to improve on this team. I was a little surprised to hear that from UD. What about you?
I think he was. I wonder if he was sort of talking about what they needed in the playoffs versus what they
Maybe.
needed. And he's like, we needed that, and he mentions like, Rozier wasn't there. Maybe he could be that guy. I do wonder what the concern level, and I don't mean to start setting off alarms here, but the concern level with the neck injury is, right?
Yes.
And I still we still need some clarity on that, and I guarantee you that's something that Pat Riley will be asked about this afternoon. But depending on what that is, maybe it's true. Maybe they still do need a scoring guard. I will say this.
Good point.
I think they need a scorer. I would go a little bit even more vague. Go get a scorer. If you can get a scoring wing, a scoring guard, I don't care. But basically that 26 point per game score, right? You look at the Heat this year. They did not have a single player in the top 40 in scoring points per game this season.
Yeah.
They didn't have a single player in the top 40. There's 30 teams in the NBA. That means that there's 10 teams at least that had 2 scorers rank over Miami's highest score. And I know that points per game isn't the end-all be-all, but it's also, I would still say, in the world of advanced analytics, and we kind of get, it is still the most important stat is the ability to put points on the board.
Right.
You still got to put more points on the board than the other one, right? And we can get into advanced box plus minus and all this kind of stuff and on-off numbers and all this stuff. You still got to put points on the board, man. Like, and the Heat had a really hard time doing it now for a couple years in a row. They need somebody who can average, and 20 points per game in today's NBA and the inflated scoring numbers is not what it used to be, right? There was a point, I don't know, 20 years ago, David? Like a 20 point per game score, there might have been 15 of them, 20 of them in the entire league. Now there's 50, 60 guys averaging. There's about 50 guys averaging 20 points per game in any given season. It's not like, hey, I'm a 20 point per game scorer. Not what it used to be. It's kind of more like 22, 23 points per game. And to get to that elite level, we're talking about like 28, 29 points per game. And that's sort of what I think the Heat need now, is that level of score to just carry this offense, because we know defense will be fine. And so I think it is interesting that Haslem kind of points out, hey, we just need to score. We need somebody who could score, right? And I'm assuming he's assuming that Jimmy Butler will be part of the mix going forward, because he's Udonis Haslem. He doesn't want to say goodbye to a winner like Jimmy Butler. But either way, you have that. I thought it was interesting that he said the center thing. I thought it was really interesting that he said Tyler Hero being a sixth man. Udonis Haslem and Tyler Hero are very, very well connected. They spoke every day last summer while Tyler Hero was going through the throes of another round of trade rumors with the Damian Lillard stuff, and they spoke every day. And one thing that Hero told me when I was working on that story that I wrote about him for The Ringer was, like, what I really appreciated about UD was that he was always honest. And so I think people might hear this, like, see Udonis Haslem on First Take being like, oh my God, he's calling out Tyler Hero. I guarantee you, anything Udonis Haslem just told Stephen A. Smith, he's already told that to Tyler Hero in private, on the phone or in person. Like, that conversation has already been had. And by the way, at the end of the year, it kind of looked like we were going in that direction, and then Duncan Robinson hurt his lower back.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. Exactly right. I mean, he came back from injury in that Houston game for a watch party, and he came off the bench. And that seemed like that was going to be the natural evolution for him, or the plateau for him, which isn't a bad place to be. Like, there's this obsession with getting picked as a starter. I mean, there's 150 starters in the NBA. 150. Like, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're the 150 best players. It's about complementary units. And as Tyler himself has said, like, he's going to be a closer, and that's absolutely fine. They can allow him to cook off the bench and produce as a scorer, and that might have helped Miami. I think they probably would have continued that route had Duncan been healthy. Unfortunately, this just wasn't an option for the team. And UD knows exactly what it is that Duncan provides in terms of the floor spacing, his ability to, pass the ball, not necessarily an evolution, as Duncan has said, and as he reiterated during his exit interview, but just something that he's worked on and continued to develop, and he's been able to incorporate with his starting lineup, and that we've seen be as prolific as ever during the course of his career this past season. And so I think he's absolutely right. I mean, we've had that conversation a number of times, and it's curious to see if Miami decides to run it back, or maybe they aren't or can't make those changes that a lot of people expect them to. That might be the next step for this Heat team, is if Terry Rozier is healthy and he does come back, that he would be the starter alongside Duncan Robinson, and you can keep Tyler Hero coming off the bench. I mean, it might provide the kind of scoring punch that Miami lacked, exactly what UD was just talking about.
We'll have time to elaborate on this a little bit more, but I do think that there's something here where Udonis Haslem might be just saying what the plan is. Like, if this is, let me put it this way. If this is the offseason plan A, go get a complimentary score. Go get, let's call it Donovan Mitchell, just to put a name to it. Just hypothetically.
Sure.
And you are able to trade pieces for him, keep Jimmy Butler, and then also go ahead and get a center who can help Bam play the 4. That solves a lot of the issues that we're talking about in terms of Miami being smaller, and then they get injured because they're smaller. By the time the playoffs roll around, you take some of that wear and tear off of Bam because you have another natural 5 next to him. Bam can play the 4. You could still mix in Bam at the 5 lineups, probably close halves with that. But just to have that optionality would be helpful. You get another scorer who can lift that offense out of the bottom 10, out of the bottom 5 in the offensive rating every season. You still have Jimmy Butler in tow, and maybe you're able to make another run at this thing. Maybe that's as simple as it is. Or, maybe the Jimmy Butler leaves, Tyler Hero stays, and Tyler Hero enters this new phase of his career where he's a sixth man. Like, there's definitely different plans here. But I found the whole thing about Udonis Haslem, sort of saying that quiet part out loud, really interesting. And just where are you on, just quick, like 30 seconds, Bam maybe moving to the 4, finding another center who might be able to play alongside him?
I think a lot depends on the offense and his continued growth as a 3-point shooter, because otherwise that spacing in the front and the starting lineup is going to be really abysmal. And I don't want to stagnate Nico's growth either. And I think he's provided enough. So it all depends on whatever roster moves they're able to make. They're going to have to field a completely different team. If they can get a guard that is a hell of a 3-point shooter to complement Bam at the 4, then yes, absolutely it would work.
We'll be back later today with an episode from Kaseya Center after Pat Riley's press conference. For now, thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Hit that subscribe button on YouTube. Follow us on your podcast app.